Well, brothers and sisters, we've had a full day. What a joy. Lots to learn, lots to grow, lots to think about. If you're like me, you're still churning and thinking, and I kind of feel like I'm the meal that you bring after you've just eaten. And you're like, oh, no more. I'm like that plate of yams at the end. We forgot about this. And you're like, we have already eaten a lot. Would you join me in prayer as we enter in? Triune God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, take these words, take this time. May we encounter your grace, your truth, your love, and may we hear your passion for all of your people. It's in your name that we pray. And all God's people said, Amen. Amen. I just want to tell you a story about a day. It was a day that has really shaped the direction of where I see ministry in my mind going. It's a very important day. It was a day that, as many big changes happened, it happened in the midst of grief. And I was experiencing grief, and grief is a part of my life. Nicholas Wolsterstorff, in his book Lament for a Son, talks about that after his son died, he said, grief is no longer the islands, it's the ocean. And that's been my experience. 12 years ago, my son died. And for me, grief is no longer the islands, it's the ocean. And so lots of my life is filled with grief. There's not a day that does not go by that I do not think, cogitate, lament upon grief. But this was a day of particular grief. And so I did what I tried to do as a Saturday, and it was not about 1:30, because at 1:30 on Saturday you should be napping. That's what 1:30 on Saturday is for. It was earlier than 1:30, and I was out biking, and I was trying to work through the grief and the questions and the challenges that were a part of my brain at the time. And I'm just going to share some of the grief that was going on. One, obviously the regular grief of just thinking about my son Zachary. Two was we were in a very difficult time as a church. The actions of the PCUSA had really upset some of the conservative and the progressive folks in our church, and we were saying goodbye. I had said goodbye to 50 people, 50 church members. I had sat down for 2 summers and just slowly said goodbye to the conservatives on our church who said, I cannot be a part of the PCUSA. To the progressives who said, I cannot be a part of a church that's not going to just jump right on board. And so we were saying goodbye, and saying goodbye involves some lament, and it involves some grief. And 14 years of relationships with these people, and saying goodbye, we were still friends, but it was different. And so there was a grief involved there. I had just seen some statistics, and it was the statistics about how the PCUSA is doing with the millennial generation, and it grieved me deeply. And it grieved, and it showed what I knew to be true in my own experience. But it showed that it wasn't just true in my experience, but it's true across our denomination. We have lost. A generation. We are far below our regular population or other church populations when it comes to reaching out to 19 to 27-year-olds. And that was a particular grief. But the largest grief was a statistic that had come out, and there's 3 or 4 different statistics, and they all range from about 50 to 70%. And this was the statistic of how many people grow up in Protestant churches, graduate from high school, and leave the church. About 50 to 70%, depending upon the statistic that you look. This is not Presbyterian. This is Protestant churches across America. 50 to 70% are leaving. And a book that we were reading said, we want you to do an exercise. Take one of the pictures of your church. Take one of the pictures that's been recently taken. Now start Xing out 60% of the faces. And we did that. And how did that make us feel? Because when it's a picture of our own church, that's not a face. That's not a number. That's not a 60%. That's a feel. That's a low one. These are kids that we have watched grow up. These are kids that we have now. It doesn't say that they've walked away from their faith. It just says that they're walking away from the church. I spent 14 years doing college ministry, and as I look back, I would say, yeah, 50 to 70% is probably a pretty good estimate in terms of what we've been experiencing in the last 20 years. In terms of, and it's where we're losing the most folks in church. In terms of growth, we're losing the most of them from that high school graduation level. Some of them come back. But as a college ministry, someone who cares about college ministry, the idea of 50 to 70% leaving did not sit well with me. Because these were kids we loved. These were kids that we had grown up. For me, these were kids that I had baptized. We use that word in our church. There was a little girl who was just about unable to talk, very precocious. And I had baptized her, and she looked up at me and she said, "You have no hair." Which is true. But then for the rest of the year, she would look at me and say, "You were the one who baptized me." So from then on, I was the baptizer. I was the one who had baptized her. And the thought of taking a marker and Xing her name out and thinking she's no longer a part of this church family, she's no longer participating in what we do, it was grief. And we as a church have gotten more and more, we've been working and working about becoming more and more focused on our children, more and more focused on our youth. When I first came to that church, we had to move an adult Sunday school over across the alleyway because we didn't have enough space for the kids who were starting to come into the church. And this angry adult, you can imagine this angry adult class came and said, "It sounds like you're prioritizing the children above us." And I said, "Because I am. I'm not going to make the 2-year-olds walk across the alley and have Sunday school. The adults can walk across the alley and have Sunday school, but the kids aren't able to walk across the alley. It's too dangerous." But it's been a long road. But now, we have a full-time youth person. And now we have a full-time children's person. And we're starting to prioritize these kids. And we're starting to see more families. And we're starting to see more kids as a part of the church. And the idea of saying goodbye later on was more than I could handle. In the midst of that, I'm biking along and I'm thinking and I'm trying to process through the grief. And I'm thinking about the text for that day. For 3 years, we had been doing a text that matched our children's curriculum. I had come to our children's pastor and said, "I want the kids to be learning the same thing the adults are so they can talk about it in the car afterwards." And she said, "I'm not going to write new curriculum for your sermons. The only way this works is if you preach on the children's curriculum." I said, "Okay, let's do it." So we did it. And it meant that I was taking the kids' curriculum and teaching it to the adults in a different way. But the text was about David and Absalom, and it's a story of death, and it's a story of rape, and it's a story of pain, and it's a story of murder, of siblings murdered, and fathers not stepping up, and of grief. But it involves a place where David was grieving over his son, but there had been a 2-year time when his son Absalom had come to Jerusalem and David wouldn't talk to him. But he was grieving the loss of the relationship when Absalom finally died. But there had been this time that Absalom was right there. And David was unwilling to cross the street and spend time with his son. And I don't want to be in grief anymore. And so as I was thinking about David and grief, and I was thinking about the research that was just coming out, and Jane started talking about the research that was coming out of the Fuller Youth Institute. And this was the research where they did something brilliant. Instead of speaking to the 50 to 70% of the kids who had left the church, they spoke to the 30 to 50% that stayed in the church. And they tried to say, what do these kids who stuck around church, what do they have in common? Is there anything that this group that stayed in church has in common? And it's not like it's a golden bullet, it's not like it's anything special, but they said as they studied that group that stayed in church, the one thing they had in common was 5 relationships. 5 relationships with faithful adults who had started to pour into their life. They didn't have years of playing Chubby Bunny. It wasn't young life. There wasn't some other thing. They had relationships with faithful adults. And I was overwhelmed, and it was one of those Holy Spirit moments as my legs were cruising along and I was trying to pedal and I was trying to go uphill. I had this overwhelming moment that these kids are in our church right now. I don't want to grieve in 5 years when they walk away from church. I don't want to grieve in 10 years when I no longer get to see them regularly. If they are here, I want to do something. I don't want to spend the rest of my days grieving because of these folks who have walked away. I want to do whatever I can to reach out. And if it takes 5 adults, let's do it. Let's do it. If that's what it takes, if it's going to take 5 adults, let's do it. And I had this overwhelming sense, I want every kid in our church to graduate with 5 adults. I want them to believe that there are 5 adults who are praying for them, who would do anything for them. If they go away to college and they decide to go on a mission trip, I want them to know I've got a name of 5 adults that if I send them a letter, I'm going to get a $100 bill right back. Because they are that invested in me. They are that invested in who I am and what I'm doing. I don't want a kid to graduate without 5 faithful adults on their team. And I had to change my sermon on Saturday afternoon. And wanted to say, I want us to be that kind of church. And the church started buying into that. But then we realized it's not just about us investing in kids. It's about the chance to mutually encourage and mutually grow from each other. And so we developed a motto. Our church motto is that we are sharing a living faith across generations. Because it goes both ways. We've learned that there is no one who is so old they have nothing to receive faith-wise. And we have learned that there is no one who is so young that they have nothing to offer in terms of faith encouragement. We have learned that it's about mutual encouragement, but we've also learned that it takes the older adult initiative. It takes the older adult saying, I'm interested. It takes the older adult willing to pursue and say, I want to have a relationship with you. I want to be a part of your life. I want to be one of your 5. I want to be the person that at graduation you invite me there. So we're learning. We're learning that this is not easy. We're learning not to ask the wrong question. Sometimes the question that we have asked is, why are the young people, why are the college students not coming to our church? We've learned that's not the right question, because that implies that we know what we're doing. We've learned that the question is not why are they not coming to our church, the question is, how much are we willing to change? You see, I told you I was a college minister. And as a college minister, I heard so often, what are you doing to help these students appreciate our style of worship? That's totally the wrong question. What are you doing in your worship to speak the language that college students would understand? If we were trying to plant a church in the middle of Italy, we wouldn't plant a church in the middle of Italy that was English-speaking and say, why aren't these Italian-speaking people coming? We wouldn't say, what's wrong with these Italian people that they're not coming to our English service? We would say, how do we speak Italian so that we can proclaim the goodness of God to the people in this area? And if we're going to reach out to young people, the question is not, how can they change to appreciate what we know is the right way to worship? But how are we willing to change? We learned it's about relationship, and the truth is, as we have heard from all 5 speakers today, and I'm the 6th one, relationships are messy. And relationships are messy, and they involve stepping on toes, and and they involve hurt feelings, and they involve copious amounts of grace. So what are we doing now as a church? We're just starting to learn. We've been repeating this motto over and over and over. Every Sunday I say, hey, we're about sharing a living faith across generations. And when we look into something that we're doing, we say, you know what that's about? That's about sharing a living faith across generations. And so we have tried to overwhelmingly say it over and over and over again. We're trying to rethink what we do. We no longer send the youth away on mission trips. We now have a bunch of adults that go with them, because we want it to be a chance to share a living faith across generations while we're doing mission. And we've tried to collect stories, and we've tried to celebrate those stories. We've tried to celebrate the people that are reaching across generational boundaries. We've tried to celebrate the people that are doing their best to be one of those 5-on-1 people. We tell stories about one of our leaders. He is a philosophy professor, and he has been working for the last 4 years with a certain age kid. And he started in first grade, and he was their first grade teacher, and then he was the second grade teacher. And he has declared this year that he's no longer going to be in the children's department, because that group of students are now going to be in the youth department. So he's going to be in the youth department. And he has already told the college department that he's coming in 7 years to be ready for him, because he's not going to leave these kids. He has gotten such a relationship with this group of kids that he is going to stay with them. So we're trying to celebrate the stories, and we're trying to pray. To be honest, when I look at the statistics, I'm not terribly bullish about our possibilities. When I look at the statistics, it seems to me overwhelmingly that we are a church that might have lost a certain generation. But I also know, from being someone who has been a part of the church and watching the story of Jesus and his people, is that what sometimes we think is a death rattle is sometimes a birth pain. And my hope and my prayer is that as we hear what may be a death rattle, that in reality it is the birth pain of something new, that God is doing something new, that this generation will not be forgotten, and that the kingdom will move forward. Would you join me in prayer as we pray for that generation? Lord, we lift up our generation of 19 to 27-year-olds, our millennials. You love them, you care about them, they're yours, Lord. Pray that you might give us wisdom and humility, that we might love them with your agape love. And all God's people said,